Hi, TBS readers. Today I'm going to read you The Ugly Menorah by Marissa Moss. Menorahs? What holiday do we use menorahs for? You got it. Hanukkah. Rachel loved the heavy silver menorah her family used every Hanukkah. All year long, it sat in the cupboard, hidden from sight. But once a year, at Hanukkah, her father brought it down and polished it and set it in the window. It was beautiful and elegant with vines etched into the branches and a Star of David. Hey, that reminds me of the menorah my parents used to use when I was little. Each night, they added another candle until the entire menorah looked magical in a gold and silver glow. I can't wait for Hanukkah this year. The lights are so mesmerizing, aren't they? This Hanukkah was different. Since school was out and it was the first Hanukkah after Rachel's grandpa had died, Rachel was staying with her grandma to keep her company. Rachel had loved visiting her grandparents. Their house used to be full of interesting things that Grandpa was working on. But without Grandpa, the house felt colder, emptier. All the junk he had collected to make things with was gone. His work gloves weren't hanging on the hook in the kitchen anymore. Only his reading chair was left, and it seemed lonely and sad to Rachel. She sat in it and tried to feel Grandpa next to her, but she couldn't. Some of us might be able to relate to what Rachel's going through in this story, and perhaps this Hanukkah will be something called bittersweet. It's bitter when something makes us sort of sad, but then the sweetness comes from something beautiful that happens out of a sad moment. Can you make a prediction and think, do you think this story is going to have a sad ending? Or do you think Rachel's going to perk up in some way? Come into the kitchen, Grandma called. I need your help grating potatoes for the latkes tonight. Yummy, said Rachel. I love latkes and applesauce. What would Hanukkah be without latkes? Grandma said, I know they're traditional, but to me, latkes just taste good. They taste like Hanukkah. Here's something sweet that's happening. Rachel gets to help her grandma make latkes. Where is your menorah, Grandma? Rachel asked. It's right there, said Grandma. She pointed to a plain wooden board with tin cylinders to hold the candles. It was not at all like the elegant silver menorah at home. That's a pretty sophisticated word, elegant. When I think of something that's elegant, I think of maybe a graceful ballerina pirouetting across the stage. Elegant means beautiful and sometimes very decorated and fancy. It's so ugly, Rachel cried. Grandma smiled. I suppose it looks that way. But I love it because Grandpa made it for me. Do you want to hear the story? Rachel thought that Hanukkah would be ruined with such an ugly menorah, but she nodded. Do you see that green dessert in the middle of the table? That's called Jell-O mold, and that was something that my mom made a lot when I was little. It's delicious if you like Jell-O. Some people don't like it because it wobbles. I love it. Well, said Grandma, it was a long time ago when we first got married. Because of the Depression, we didn't have much money. Hanukkah was coming and we had no menorah to light the candles in. The Great Depression was a time period, long time ago. In the late 20s to mid 1930s, when a lot of people were out of work and did not have much money. Every day I passed the shop windows and looked at the different menorahs. I even picked out the one I wanted. Oh, it was beautiful. Shiny silver with wonderful designs worked into it, grapes and leaves and lions, and a Star of David. It should belong to a queen, that menorah. Your grandpa knew I wanted that menorah. He tried so hard to get it for me. He worked long hours at the tailor shop, but he couldn't earn enough money for even the simplest menorah. Grandpa was lucky to have a job back then. A lot of people didn't. Can you guess what might happen next? But walking home every day, Grandpa passed a construction site. A big building was going up. Scraps of wood were lying all around. Bits of tin gleamed in the dirt. Grandpa went up to the foreman and asked if he could have some of the leftover cuttings. The foreman laughed. "It's junk, trash, take all you want," he said. Rachel smiled. So Grandpa was collecting junk even back then? "Yes," said Grandma, "but it wasn't junk to him. Not to Grandpa." Have you ever heard the saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure? Seems like that fits Grandpa perfectly. Anyway, Grandma said, it was the first night of Hanukkah. I made latkes and applesauce and waited for Grandpa. When he opened the door, he could smell how delicious everything was, and he smiled a big smile. I was a little sad we had no menorah, but I smiled too and pretended it didn't matter. Then Grandpa handed me a package wrapped in newspaper. I couldn't think what it could be. I tore open the paper, and there it was. Our menorah. Grandpa had made it from those scraps of wood and tin. Oh, it certainly wasn't fit for a queen, but it was perfect for us. And I was so happy to be lighting the candles and saying the blessings over our own menorah that by the 8th night, when all the flames were dancing, I thought it was the most beautiful menorah in the world. And you know, I still think so. Rachel looked again at the plain little menorah. She remembered Grandpa's strong, knotty hands and the toys he had made with them for her, all from things he had found on the street. The rocking horse, the building blocks, the dollhouse. "I miss Grandpa," Rachel said. "Me too," Grandma sighed. "But it still isn't beautiful," Rachel thought. "I'm sorry you couldn't have a real menorah," she said, "like the one you saw in the shop window." "Oh," said Grandma, "it's real." That looks like a menorah that perhaps some of you might have made when you were younger. Little bolts, maybe, in a piece of wood. That night, Grandma lit the first candle with the shamus, the candle that is used to light the others, and she and Rachel chanted the Hanukkah blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, vitzivanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with the commandments and commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah lights. Rachel watched the flames flickering yellow, then blue, then white. For the first time since Grandpa died, she felt he was with her again. She could hear his gravelly voice saying the prayer. She could smell his pepperminty and woolly smell. She could see his slow, gentle turtle smile in the glowing candlelight. Rachel hugged Grandma. I see why you love your menorah so much, she said. On the last night of Hanukkah, Rachel's parents came to celebrate with them before taking Rachel home the next day. Oh, Mama, Rachel's mother said, do you still have that old menorah? Why don't you buy a new one like ours? I don't need a new one, Grandma said. Do I, Rachel? No, Rachel said. This menorah is very special and very beautiful. And here it is. Was I right? Bittersweet. The story began pretty sad because Rachel was missing her grandfather. And then once she learned the story of this ugly menorah, things really perked up a bit, didn't they? I hope you enjoy lighting your menorah this Hanukkah. And I can't wait to read with you next time. Bye-bye.